Chapter 7 Springing the Trap. The Black Wolf, through long experience with men and traps, had learned to avoid having any favorite trails. He tried to go through the woods by a different route each time. When the snow was on the ground, he almost never walked in his old tracks. Gradually, Reddy had acquired the same habit. To avoid poison as well as traps, the wolf would not go near carrion or return to an animal that he'd killed after he'd feasted and left it. This, too, the hound learned. That was one reason why he came through that first year in the mountains without being caught in a trap, without having suffered the agonies of poison. The two fur trappers who'd operated the valley of the Little Sheep Creek during the previous winter were smart men. While visiting Johnny and tending the small traps they set for beaver, mink, marten, fox, and ermine catches, they'd studied the possibilities of the country for larger game and found plenty of wolf tracks. Neither of them had ever caught a big timber wolf, so they were especially interested in pitting their wits against the wolf cunning and showing their friends at home how good they were. During the summer they collected heavy wire snares so that they could make the trip into the valley 2 weeks earlier than the shooting season, before the wolves would be made wary by the scent of the gunners and the sound of the rifles in the woods. This was an excellent plan as far as securing wolves was concerned, but was not considered legal to trap out of the regular season, even a bounty such as a wolf, nor was it playing fair with the other trappers to do this. Therefore, the two slipped into the valley without saying anything about it to Johnny, and set their snares carefully and furtively as any felon. They remembered well where they'd seen wolf tracks, and they went quietly from place to place on foot, without so much as disturbing a marmot that might whistle an alarm. At the end of the first day, they'd placed 10 snares across possible trails in sections where they knew the wolves had traveled. This was done while Reddy and the King were in the neighborhood of Eagle Peak. To say that when the hound and the black wolf returned to the valley, they were entirely unsuspecting, was not exactly correct. The wolf in particular was always suspicious. Except when chasing game ahead of him, he was watching for some dangerous trick of man along every foot of ground that he covered. He remembered the time he'd nearly been killed by a cleverly placed snare, and on innumerable occasions he'd located both traps and snares in time to avoid being caught. Always there had been either a faint scent of man or the subtle taint of steel in the air. Now approaching the Little Sheep Creek, his nostrils caught man scent. The King stopped as suddenly as if someone had shot at him. He stood, not moving even a toe, while he looked and listened. It was night time, therefore it was a trap rather than a gun that he feared. Behind him, like a statue, stood the hound, his nose and eyes equally busy. The forest around them was quiet except for the murmur of the water in the creek, almost too quiet, as if it had been deserted by other animals. The scent was faint, but unmistakable. The wolf's nose searched the ground. The smell of shoe leather was there, in depressed places. Then he caught a mere whiff of the scent of steel, and he knew just as surely as if he'd seen the men setting it. Somewhere close, perhaps beside or even under him, there was some diabolical contrivance that aimed at destroying him. Men did not often make blind sets without bait or housing, unless they were trying something particularly dangerous to him. Backing carefully, he forced Reddy away, too. And after that, he made a wide detour and then suddenly stopped again. More scent and more steel. That was enough for the King. With Reddy still a few paces behind, he turned around in his tracks and trotted up the mountain to leave the valley. Now, however, Reddy rebelled and hung back. He was old enough to have a mind of his own, and now that he was close, he wanted to rest and recover from his wounds in the comfortable thicket that they'd often frequented so much, across the valley from Johnny's cabin. The old wolf turned back and pulled at his shoulder with gentle teeth. But Reddy, though usually easily influenced, this time continued to move away. When the wolf whined further to show his disapproval, the tired hound, becoming reckless, pretended not to hear. He made his way slowly and resolutely toward the thicket, walking straight into a snare. There was a tug against his chest, and then a quick crash to the left, and a vice closed on one leg and his neck as the heavy log, propped in the crotch of a tree, was released, and its fall jerked the wire taut and yanked him partly into the air. Howling with fear and rage, he hurled his body this way and that, until the wire bit cruelly into his skin and he was nearly strangled. Only the fact that one front leg up to the shoulder was also in the noose saved him. Gasping and weak, he gradually calmed down and hung there, quivering all over, his hind legs on the ground, but the fore part of his body was suspended. At this time, the black wolf sprang for the wire and tore and ripped at it with his teeth, not realizing that every jerk brought more torture to Reddy and did no good. Again and again he made this brave, magnificent, wild leaps until his whole mouth bled and he too was exhausted. Frustrated and beaten, he lay panting on the ground, always looking at Reddy, his brain working to devise a cure for this dreadful thing. And then he howled, such sadness and despair in his voice that every living creature in the valley took heed. And though not knowing what it was all about, all became worried and ill at ease. The two trappers in their tent heard it and looked at each other with quickened breath. Johnny heard it, climbed out of his bunk and opened the door to better understand it. The three black and tans howled dismally in sympathy. A coyote on the ridge and one beside the creek set up separate wails. The king howled and howled, and no creature slept. At dawn, Johnny gulped some coffee and started out into the gray light to learn what happened. When the three hounds tried to follow, he ordered them back, for he guessed that the black wolf had been caught in a trap, and he was debating what he should do if he found the great animal. And Reddy? Well, perhaps if the king were captured, this reclamation of the hound could be more possible. With the instinct of a real woodsman, Johnny slipped through the forest in an almost direct line to the spot which the howling had seemed to come from. Everything was quiet now. The ranger moved with caution, stopping from time to time to look ahead and listen. He was not surprised to find the tracks of the two trappers. And then more than ever he was sure that the wolf was in a trap. Plainly, the men were breaking the law, setting traps out of season, when the woods were supposed to be safe for man and beast. Suppose that the three black and tans had been roaming the woods and had been injured by being caught. Well, he'd report the matter to headquarters anyway, but first he must find the trapped wolf. The sun came up and shone on the mountains, but the valley was still in shadow as Johnny searched almost within a stone's throw of the right spot. There was nothing to guide him, no visible tracks here, no howling, no clamor of jays. He sat down on a log and tried to study the probable course of the trappers. It seemed likely that they would have followed the creek, but he'd seen no sign. Strange. But no, illegal work must be hidden. The men would have perhaps set their traps where he would ordinarily never think of looking for them, up among the rocks. With fresh confidence, he started to search in the direction of the summit. He was above the timber when the black animal came running uphill from a line of low trees, and Johnny quickly recognized the king. In long bounds, the wolf, who showed no signs of trap or injury, took to the slope and passed within 20 yards of the ranger, who remained motionless and partly hidden. When, however, the big animal caught the man scent, he stopped, and for a moment looked directly at Johnny under puckered brows, with a wistful, rather than the usual, sinister expression. And as Johnny watched him, his mind jumped to Reddy, and he guessed for the first time that it was he who was in trouble. Poor Reddy! Johnny had such hopes for the hound. He watched the famous old wolf until he topped the ridge and vanished. Now Johnny ran down the mountain toward the low row of trees, but with utmost caution, lest he start any stones rolling noisily, for he must find out what had scared away the wolf. In the shadow of the spruce tree, he slowed to a fast walk, and then stopped stock still, for he heard voices. The trappers came blundering through the woods toward their last snare. They had already visited the other sets and found nothing caught, so their expectations were at high pitch as they neared this one. The taller man in the lead held his rifle in readiness. When he parted the final barrier of branches, he came in full view of the snare and the big red hound suspended there, his eyes on the approaching men. Suddenly Reddy knew that here was the greatest danger he'd ever faced, and with all his remaining strength he lunged against the pull of the wire and fairly hurled his body forward. At first, the shock of seeing a huge hound instead of a wolf, the men were confused and uncertain as to what to do. But they'd heard, of course, of the wild red dog in the mountains, on whose head was at least a $50 bounty, and then they realized that the animal might tear loose in his struggles, and they did not hesitate long. "Shoot him," whispered the one in the rear. The other raised a rifle. "Hold on there." Slowly the surprised men turned their heads and saw Johnny. He was coming down the slope among the trees with his peculiar gliding gait, and he did not stop until he'd reached the men. "I'll take this," he said, laying his hand on the rifle. "Well, I'll be! Of all things!" gasped the taller man. "How did you get here?" He kept his hold on the rifle and faced the ranger. "Bill," said Johnny, trying not to show any anger, "I wouldn't have thought that you and Mose would break the law. You thought you could get away with it, I suppose, but you can't, and I'm here to see that there's no more of this." He tried to take the rifle. "Let me have that gun. Not till I've shot that renegade dog." "That is my dog," said Johnny, and if the men were surprised before, they were doubly so when they heard this. "You mean that dog who turned wolf and has the whole world after him is one of your pack? Well, that's something for a ranger. Wait till the authorities hear about it. You'll get fired sure. Maybe it would be better if we decide not to tell. Yeah, you'd better think that over." Bill felt almost elated. He thought the tables were turned against the ranger. "I know what you're driving at, and it won't do you a bit of good," Johnny said, holding it himself in with difficulty. "Come on, give me the gun." "If you were 4 cops, you wouldn't get this gun. You're as good as fired right now. Look out or you may get shot. We don't calculate on letting a bounty dog get away. Look out, I tell you." Johnny was pushing the men back. If they got the upper hand, there would be little chance of saving Reddy. "Bill, don't be unreasonable," he urged. "Can't you see that besides the matter of trapping, I have every right to protect my hound? Suppose he were yours. Wouldn't you feel just like me? I'm going to set him free, and if you've injured him, you're responsible. Now give me elbow room." "That wild brute's ours, not yours," cut in the man called Mose. "You're the one who's trying to break the law. And what's more, if you lay your hands on our gun, we're going to protect ourselves and our property. We'll spread you out for the ravens before you will be bullied, you ex-ranger." "Are you trying to get the bounty yourself?" snarled Bill. "I don't believe this big brute ever saw you before. Look at him tearing things up. He wasn't anywhere around your shack when we were there. If you want him so badly, we'll sell our rights for $50. Now what do you say? But on top of that, you're going to forget that we were in this valley before the season, you understand?" "Fair enough," added Mose with a broad grin. "That's our proposition. Make up your mind, Ranger." Johnny was in a quandary. He felt positive that Reddy would fight him if he went within reach now. It would take a lot of planning and careful work to set a wild creature like him free. Work which the trappers must not see. His one chance was to outbluff them. "Where are your other traps?" he asked belligerently. "What other traps?" asked Bill slyly. "Come on. Cut out this cop stuff. We've got you, and you know it." He looked confidently at Mose for approval. Johnny saw that he was losing. The men were tough, and they had a double stake to win. The circumstances gave them the upper hand. He looked at Reddy and saw the big hound was watching him. He wondered whether Reddy understood what was going on and would allow him to work on the snare. No, he argued, that would be expecting too much. Then he saw the hound's eyes shift. Following his glance, he glimpsed one of the black and tans slinking timidly in the bushes. What luck! The hound had followed him after all. "Nell," he called, glancing exultantly at the men. "Come here, Nell. Nice old Nell." His hopes skyrocketed. The pup would show that she and Reddy were friends and packmates. After that, it would be futile for his adversaries to claim that Reddy was just a wild dog. Nell's timidity vanished at the unexpectedly warm reception. She ran forward, wagging her tail furiously and whining with delight. Behind her, equally encouraged and happy, burst the other two. From Johnny, they ran to their brother without the slightest hesitation, for they were accustomed to being tied themselves and saw nothing wrong. They frisked around him, reached up to lick his nose, and tried to make him play with them. It was like a joyful reunion. The trapper said nothing. Mose spit loudly to relieve his feelings, but his partner just walked away. Things didn't look good for them. The shoe was on the other foot, and the sooner they gathered up their snares the better, for Johnny's other dogs might get caught, and he might have an even better case against them. Johnny breathed easier. He'd expected real trouble. Suddenly, however, Bill returned. "Remember," he warned in an ugly voice, "if you squawk about us, we'll fix you, and your red dog." "You and your snares are to be out of this valley before night," countered the ranger. "That's what you say," sneered Bill over his shoulder. Johnny trailed the men for some distance to make sure they'd gone far enough away. Then he hastened back to Reddy. With the black and tans frisking about him, he went within a couple of paces of the snare, all the time talking to the trapped hound in his quiet way. Reddy's eyes, bloodshot and bulging, never left his. But the hound, beyond quivering in every muscle, made no move, and seemed almost resigned to his fate, whatever it might be. First of all, the ranger with difficulty raised the log to its place in the tree crotch, thus releasing the pull of the wire and lowering Reddy's heavy body to the ground, where it lay on sprawled legs, from which the power seemed gone. Then slowly, gently, he worked on the wire, slipping it through the noose bit by bit, until the loop was large enough to go over Reddy's weary head. Part of the wire was embedded in the skin, but the flesh, caked as it was with blood, had lost feeling. After being drawn from under the body, the wire dropped harmlessly on the ground, and Reddy was free. Would he run into the woods, or turn dangerous? Or did he perhaps realize that Johnny was a friend and benefactor? For more than a year, his whole training had been bitterly against man. Fear and hatred had been taught to his heart. The spirit of the wild had kept him with his brethren the wolves, free to roam, to hunt, to spurn the very thought of subservience to man. Yet he lay, not trying to move, while an unarmed man crouched beside him and stroked his head. End of chapter 7.